One of the main requests that the Ukrainian people and people around the world turned to NATO with was a request to provide cover for the sky over Ukraine. Since NATO doesn't want a direct confrontation with the Russian Federation, this request was ignored in the first days of the war. However, now everything points to the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine will, before long, be able to cover the sky over Ukraine on their own, thanks to the help of Western partners. In addition to air defense systems, there's also the possibility of transferring fighter jets to Ukraine, which should help resolve this issue. This is already being actively discussed. In today's video, we'll be talking about these iron birds and the benefits they can provide to the Ukrainian army. The aviation possessed by the Russian invaders turned out to be, to put it mildly, incompetent when it came to direct confrontation with experienced fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine. Even with a significant overbalance in the number of Russian aircraft, these invaders are nevertheless scared to death of the Ukrainian borders, although they continue to cowardly fire missiles at the civilian population of Ukraine and its infrastructure from within the safe territories of Russia and Belarus. Also pathetic were the statements made by the heads of the occupation forces and those court jesters of the Russian authorities, all of whom claimed that all Ukrainian aviation had been destroyed back in February. However, the facts of the matter have shown us that the armed forces of Ukraine's aircraft not only remain combat ready, but also regularly inflict colossal damage on the invaders, destroying their ammunition depots, equipment, and the manpower sent behind the Russian warship. After repeated requests from Ukrainian authorities and the military to equip them with American fighter jets, Republican congressman and former US Air Force pilot Adam Kinzinger offered to allocate funds for the training of Ukrainian pilots. Two UAF pilots, call signs Juice and Moonfish, spoke on Capitol Hill, as well as at the Pentagon, about the challenges they faced flying the MiG-29 in dogfights against more advanced enemy aircraft. They reiterated their appeal to the US government to help them acquire F-16s and get them trained. According to Yuri Ignat, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force Command, it will take up to 6 months for pilot to swap out into new fighters, and most of this time will be spent on tactics and the use of new weapons. He also added that 2 F-16 squadrons of 12 aircraft with small reserves would be enough to destroy the occupiers' fighters even more effectively. At the same time, many of Ukraine's allies have repeatedly noted the amazing motivation displayed by the operators in the armed forces of Ukraine, and their ability to train several or even dozens of times faster than the scheduled pace. Juice had stated that he and his colleagues could learn to fly the F-16 in a few days, after which it would take several more weeks to learn how to handle weapons. Shortly thereafter, the House of Representatives approved an $840 billion FY 2023 defense budget that, among other things, provided for $1 billion in aid to Ukraine and took into account the KINZINGER Amendment to allocate $100 million to train UAF pilots to fly the F-15 and F-16. 50 years have passed since the moment when the F-15 first took to the skies. During this time, the Eagle managed to not only make itself known as one of the most successful fighters in US history, but also to set a combat record of 104 downed enemy aircraft without a loss. The early F-15s from McDonnell Douglas made almost every 4th-generation fighter jet in other countries think twice before engaging in a dogfight with the American aircraft. With 2 Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW-100 afterburner turbofans, capable of generating a whopping 23,500 pounds of thrust by the standards of that day, and the F-15 was so powerful it could break the speed of sound when flying straight up. And with a top speed of Mach 2.5 and advanced APG-63 nose radar, the F-15 could even spot enemy aircraft flying at low altitudes up to 200 miles away. Eagle radars are the first to use a programmable system processor, allowing upgrades and improvements to be integrated without the need to replace hardware. Not too long after, this became one of the main features in even the latest F-35, which receives regular software updates to improve its overall performance. The F-15 successfully proved itself during fighting in the Middle East, the war in the Persian Gulf, Iraq, Libya, Yugoslavia, and other most grueling US military operations. The latest F-15EX, or Eagle II, is designed to replace the US Air Force's aging F-15C fleet, and promises to be an incredibly powerful and economical aircraft. The fighter can carry a payload of 12 air-to-air missiles, or 15 air-to-ground missiles, which is 4 times that of the F-35, all while maintaining stealth. It also has the latest integrated electronic warfare system. The US Air Force even plans to link its stealth F-35s to missile platforms, in the form of the F-15EX, via a secure data link for maximum effectiveness on the battlefield. Having promptly received data from these invisible setups about the location of enemies, the F-15EX will immediately step into action, firing dozens of missiles from a great distance. Don't get me wrong, stealth is amazing. But almost 30,000 pounds of ammunition on the pylons of a fighter jet, whistling at twice the speed of sound, will definitely throw the enemy into full-blown hysteria. And now, it's time to move on to its big brother. Like any 4th-generation American fighter, the F-16 Fighting Falcon was created taking into account the experience of the US Air Force in Vietnam. The US Air Force needed an agile, light fighter, capable of being a good alternative to heavy and complex fighters like the F-4 Phantom, F-14 Tomcat, and the previously mentioned F-15 Eagle. This idea quickly found its response in the command and funding from the authorities, resulting in the lightweight fighter LWF program. Back in 1972, 2 teams remained out of 6 manufacturers participating in the competitive selection. General Dynamics with its model 401-16B, and the Northrop P600, which later transformed into YF-16 and YF-17. Both of them weighed about 20,000 pounds unladen, which was much lighter than a 28,000-pound F-15 and much less than a 40,000-pound F-14. As a result, the F-16 from General Dynamics, which had better maneuverability, greater flight range, and most importantly a lower cost than the YF-17, was declared the undisputed winner of the competition. However, the latter also found its place elsewhere in the service. It became the basis of the future F/A-18 Hornet of the US Navy. The F-16 received only one engine, unlike its predecessor, the F-15, but in return it got advanced aerodynamics and avionics, including, for the first time, an integrated flight control system with relaxed static stability, RSS, and fly-by-wire, FBW, for improved maneuverability. Due to its high maneuverability, the Fighting Falcon was the first fighter designed to perform maneuvers with an overload of 9G, and a maximum speed of more than Mach 2. Among other innovations, it's worth noting the frameless bubble canopy and joystick, now located on the side rather than in the center, like the Soviet MiG-29, Su-25, and other fighters in service with Ukraine and other Eastern European states. In addition to the M61 Vulcan cannon mounted inside the fuselage to the left of the cockpit, the early F-16s were armed with 6 AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range heat-seeking AAM air-to-air missiles and medium-range radar-guarded AIM-7 SPARROW missiles. Newer modifications have facilitated support for the AIM-120 AMRAAM, which resourceful American pilots have since begun to install on the wingtips to further reduce aircraft flutter. In addition to the missiles already mentioned, the F-16 can carry other AAMs, a wide range of air-to-ground missiles, rockets or bombs, weapons containers, or fuel tanks on 9 hardpoints. Of these, 6 are under the wings, 2 are at the wingtips, and 1 under the fuselage. For now, F-16 production is still in full swing at Lockheed Martin's factories in South Carolina, and the US Air Force has extended its F-16's flight hours to 12,000. Therefore, we'll be able to see the F-16 in the sky even more, at least until the end of the 2030s. Additionally, the command's desire to have the MRX multi-purpose stealth fighter as a replacement for its Fighting Falcon fleet hasn't disappeared altogether, even after the appearance of brand new F-35s. Interest in updating proven platforms such as the F-15 and F-16 may well revive the underdeveloped F-16XL Delta Wing prototype, which has twice the payload. So what's the bottom line then? We have two time-honored, adaptable American fighters with dozens of modifications that are still being improved even today. But apparently, serious talk about Ukraine receiving one or even several groups of such aircraft won't begin until autumn. At the same time, let's not forget about the other allies of this European country, which supply it with spare parts for the aircraft already in service. According to media reports, it was thanks to the timely supply of various parts that the armed forces of Ukraine managed to replenish their fleet with 20 Soviet fighters. And although the senior US official who broke the news didn't specify which country transferred the spare parts, Poland and Slovakia have repeatedly offered to transfer their MiG-29s to Ukraine in exchange for American F-16s. Also, parts for the MiG-29 were found in the recently released list of the Bundeswehr assistance to Ukraine. But given the Germans' bureaucracy, the local authorities would hardly have time to send the parts on such short notice, in parallel with the transfer of the PZH-2000 self-propelled guns and other types of military assistance from Germany. After some time, information appeared that Poland had nevertheless transferred to Ukraine close to its entire reserve of materials for the MiG-29. And now, the armed forces of Ukraine have the opportunity to restore the combat capability of their Iron Birds on an ongoing basis. The MiG-29 has been the main multi-role fighter aircraft for the Warsaw Pact countries and the USSR since the 1980s. The MiG-29's armament includes a single 30mm GSH-31 cannon, set in the left wing with an initial magazine load of 150 rounds, now reduced to 100, thus allowing only a few seconds of fire before running out. After the release of the serial MiG-29I, it turned out that it could not shoot from a cannon with a fuel tank in the center, since it blocked the projectile's ejection port. Engineers managed to correct this defect in the MiG-29C and subsequent versions. The aircraft has 6 or 8 pylons, 3 or 4 under each wing, depending on modification, as well as internal mounts carrying a 300-gallon fuel tank, one VYMPEL R-27, AA-10 ALAMO, medium-range air-to-air missile, or unguided bombs or rockets. Some Soviet MiG-29s could also carry a nuclear bomb, but oftentimes the outer pylons carry R-73, AA-11 Archer, or older R-60, AA-8 APHID air-to-air missiles. According to assurances given by USSR authorities and the factory team that created this aircraft, its maneuverability was not much inferior to the F-18 and F-16. But the small fuel supply allowed it to carry out only short-range air defense tasks. The lack of the HOTAS system and the inter-aircraft data link, as well as the highly complicated work in the cockpit, simply did not allow even experienced pilots to use most of the fighter's capabilities on par with their foreign colleagues. And although Ukraine did not have an extensive fleet of MiG-29s, most of them were still modernized and put into combat condition. The Russian Ministry of Defense admitted back in 2009 that about 200 of the 300 MiG-29s in service wouldn't be able to take off due to tail corrosion. It turns out that the Russian occupiers had handled the disposal of their own military equipment rather well, even before the start of the war with Ukraine. As of July 20th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported 220 destroyed aircraft from the occupational forces side. Therefore, we can say with confidence that even though only Su-25, Su-27, and MiG-29 fighters were present, this did not prevent the pilots in the armed forces of Ukraine from forcing the enemy to run away with their tail tucked between their legs. How soon do you think Ukraine will be able to acquire the F-15 and F-16? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more content like today's. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.